This video is brought to you literally and figuratively by Micro Center. So it turns out I've actually bought a lot of stuff from Micro Center, but also, this video, they said, hey, we've got a special going on. You can get $25 off a processor if you do a build. They got a build running on for a very short, limited period of time. There's a link below. You should check that out. A PC Builder. It doesn't cost you anything to check it out. You can click and do stuff and fun, exciting things. It's an online PC parts builder, but yeah, the stuff here on the desk, all the different Alder Lake processors that I've had lately, they came from Micro Center because Micro Center things are going on. Actually, probably about half my Z690 stuff has come from Micro Center. I can't help but notice they've also stocked Threadripper Pro motherboards, or at least they were out of stock for a long time. And now there's a couple of Sage WRX80 motherboards. What could be going on that demands Threadripper Pro 5000 support? Well, I don't know about the processors, but the motherboards are there. If you need help building a machine like Threadripper Pro 5000 or a server or anything else that I'm looking at, or you're looking at this pizza box server that I'm about to show you and saying, well, this would almost work, but we really need to add some stuff to it, Micro Center will help you do that. Sometimes you even get rebates on the processors and motherboard combos. That's usually what I do. That's like the cheat codes for the cheap build. It's like, well, I didn't really want an i3, but if Micro Center's going to give it to me for like $60, that's basically giving it away, right? So, and then you end up with 12 systems, and we have a giveaway in the Level 1 forums. But I digress. On with the show. Look at this tiny little thing from Supermicro. Yes, this is a Xeon with error-correcting memory. We've got hot swap mechanical hard drives. We turn this thing into a small business backup appliance, basically, that also runs containers and virtual machines. Got a bunch of large hard drives in it. Got a bunch more 16 and 20 terabyte mechanical hard drives that I picked up at Micro Center with my own money. Well, guess what? You saw this and you said, well, okay, yeah, that's small, that's cool. 6 cores, error-correcting memory, it's got all the features, but I need something a little bit more rackish. Well, have I got the thing for you? Is that a rack mount pizza box in your box, or are you just happy to see me? This is the Supermicro SYS 5019 MR Supermicro Super Servers. Now available at Micro Center. Micro Center did send this, by the way. So in the box, rails. They sent us rails because they know we're going off the rails. See what I mean by pizza box? And Supermicro's gotten a lot of mileage out of this design. And yes, we do in fact have redundant hot swap power supplies. Dual redundant 400 watt power supplies. This chassis is based around the X11 SCMF motherboard. It does have one full width expansion slot. This is a Xeon processor. It's the smaller family of Xeon processors. You're not going to be putting a 28 core or anything like that in here. But this makes an excellent appliance, such as for routers, be they forbidden or not forbidden. This is an excellent appliance if you wanted to run pfSense or OpenSense or OpenWRT, something like that. It has dual built-in NICs. You can actually get other versions of this motherboard that have even more built-in NICs that you can kind of see. It's like, wait a minute, there's more stuff on the motherboard that could be soldered there. Yes, indeed. Up to 8 NICs on this motherboard, as a matter of fact, because Supermicro knows their customer base. This motherboard also has dual M.2 ports. In this configuration with this chassis, it comes installed with a Samsung 983. That is an enterprise-grade M.2. You can get those in capacities up to, I think, 4 terabytes. Well, 2 terabytes are readily available. I happen to have some of those on hand. But, in capacities up to 4 terabytes, it's no problem. It also has SATA DOM ports, so if you wanted to run a powered SATA disk-on module, you totally can. For the orange ports, there's also supplemental power headers that are there. It's Supermicro standard. Consult the motherboard manual if you're curious about that kind of thing, just to make sure I didn't get it slightly wrong, but it should be okay. And then, of course, you got 4 DIMM slots, so you can rock up to 128 gigs of unregistered error-correcting memory in this configuration. The default configuration of this platform is a single 16 gigabyte DIMM. If you're building your own small business network-attached storage appliance, you pretty much don't need anything other than the base configuration and 4 20 terabyte hard drives. You can use the M.2 for your operating system and this for your redundant storage. You can set up RAID Z1 or some other, RAID 5 equivalent and have 60 terabytes of usable storage in this platform. No problem. There are 4 1U cooling fans that are installed. If you were going to install a really high performance, like a tri-mode host bus adapter for an external disk shelf or something like that, I'm actually thinking about doing a Supermicro build for Gamers Nexus for their storage server that's based on something like that, then I would want to replace these blanks with some additional cooling fans. Something like that, even if you're supporting 24 mechanical hard drives. This Xeon is a fast Xeon, even though this platform tops out at, I think, 8 cores for the Xeon. That's plenty fast enough for attaching a disk shelf of 24 disks to the network and being able to saturate the network at 10 gigabit speeds. That was appealing. Be sure to remove the plastic because it does actually breathe through those holes before you use it. Alright, so for our build, I've decided to build sort of the ultimate home lab server, or the ultimate small medium business server. I'm going to call this home lab, but this is really for the sophisticated power users, not actually something I expect you to run in your homes, but there's a lot of you out there that are going to see this and they're going to say, ooh, this is really nice, I'm going to do this. First off, I'm going to add another 16 gigabytes of Supermicro RAM that is specifically for this system, and it matches the existing DIMM that's in there. Using matched memory is really important. I'm putting it in the other blue slot. I'm going to install TrueNAS, which is based on FreeBSD on this, but it doesn't really matter your host operating system. What I'm going to turn this into is a backup appliance that also runs containers and has an easy to manage GUI. So we're going to install Home Assistant and a whole bunch of other things, but I want to introduce you to this really cool project called Homer. It's a home server. That's how it, home server, Homer. It's a dashboard that lets you get at all the containers and everything that you're running. So with 32 gigabytes of memory, this thing's not going to really have a ton of storage, but you'll be able to back up Mac computers with Time Machine. Yeah, it can pretend to be Time Machine. SMB Windows shares. If you have any Linux machines, you can back up with rsync or NFS, or host rsync or NFS. So this ends up being sort of the ultimate compact rack mount home office server that has backup and has replication and can also run Pi-hole and all sorts of other containers. Well, I mean, Pi-hole, Home Assistant, you could even do your Steam cache on this and all that. Thought about using this as a control server for a disk shelf, but if I use this as a control server for a disk shelf, I don't have any option for really high-speed networking. I would need to get another configuration, another hardware configuration that has a really fast built-in NIC, or something that supports like an OCP2 add-in card or has multiple expansion slots or something like that. This is a pizza box, and it's a Xeon, but we're still talking 32 gigabytes of memory, max 128, so I don't want to go too crazy here. And this will make a perfect backup appliance for redundancy and control. And if you're using something like Home Assistant for home automation, the redundant power supplies and error correcting memory and redundant disks will really make things nice. It's pretty easy to add the upgraded memory. I've got the installer on the USB stick. And hey, if TrueNAS isn't your speed, you could try Unraid, you could try a different operating system that offers similar features, but for what I just proposed, TrueNAS Scale really does tick all the boxes. Okay, installation of TrueNAS, or really any operating system of your choice on this thing, could not be easier. We just pop in the USB, we run through the installer. At that point, it's going to reboot. It's going to give us an IP address on the LAN. My LAN here is a 192.168 subnet, pretty standard internal network. You go there in the web GUI, you log in with root and the password that you set during installation. Now the step-by-step for installing ZFS, not really part of this video. We'll get ZFS installed, sort of showed you a little preview of that. You get your Z pool set up, that means your storage. You have to create a ZFS pool. If you really need help with that, come to the Level 1 forums, there's a guide for it, but get your Z pool set up and basically you're ready to add containers. That's the next thing. Adding containers is pretty easy, it's a point-and-click GUI. From here, we need to install TrueNAS Charts. TrueNAS Charts is an extension of the plugin system because by default, when you're on the Apps tab in TrueNAS, there's only like 4 things. That's not really super useful. And this is what I wanted to introduce you to. Homer. I mentioned it, but Homer is really cool. It's got a text mode configuration, and the TrueNAS UI for configuring containers is honestly really a little clunky. So before we get too far down in the weeds in the apps, the first thing that you're going to want to do is go to Credentials and then set up a user. I'm just going to set up a user called user, and it's going to create a user, and it gets a user ID, which is by default 1000. This is kind of important, and you start to notice things in the UI. In the container system, when we go to create containers, which are the applications that we want to do things, it says, do you want to run as user ID 0, which is root, or do you want to run as a particular user? if we're going to be able to alter the configuration of these and you don't want to use the terminal, then it sort of pays to do these things not as root. So for Homer, I'm going to tell it that the Homer container is going to be owned by user 1000. But we're not quite there yet. We actually have to set up TrueNAS charts. So step by step, there's a guide on the level 1 forum for what you need to do, but there's also really good documentation actually from TrueNAS on setting up the True Charts system so that you can install all this without too much headache. I mean, it's pretty awesome. It's pretty straightforward, but that's some stuff that you need to know up front about the whole permission system, because if you get too far down the path setting this up, then you end up in a position where the permissions are all messed up and things don't work, and you try to edit the configuration and it's just not really super great. What you're doing with Homer, though, is building a web UI so that you can just point and click to the different things that are installed without necessarily even having to log into the TrueNAS UI as the root user or another user. We're going to go through and set up several containers or charts, whatever you want to call them. These are really just Docker containers. That's all it is. All this is just Docker and Kubernetes under the hood. So we're going to set up some stuff that I like. Nextcloud is really awesome and by far the most well put together chart in this whole thing that I'm showing you. Then we've also got Homer, and for the Homer thing, you actually want to configure something called the host path, which is where it stores the configuration. In my case, I picked a path that was on a network share. In my ZFS pool called Tank, which I didn't actually show you how to set up, that's in the TrueNAS video, you can go check that out. But I created a storage pool called Tank, and then inside the Tank I created some data sets. And one of the data sets is going to be accessible from the network. It's under NetShare, but I've also got another one called User, which is, goes with my user account. So under there is where I want to put my Homer configuration. Well, here in the charts, I also want to tell it, hey, your Homer configuration is in this folder. And in so doing, I've made the configuration for Homer accessible on the network because it's just YML files. YML, yet another markup language. So I can edit this on whatever I want. Now I could do this in VI from the shell interface. That's totally fine, that's totally valid. You could do that right through the UI in TrueNAS, but it might be easier for a lot of you if you use Notepad++ on Windows or whatever on Mac OS. You just open up the config file, you edit it, and you're good to go. Now, if you get a permissions error, it means something went wrong with setting up the user credentials or how you're logged on or some other parameter like that. You could change the Unix file mode to 777, but if you do that, you're gonna have to reset those permissions back to a more reasonable 644, because when you restart the container for Homer, it's gonna see that and it's gonna say, oh, that's a security issue. For the other true charts that we want to install, we can just search for available applications and install them. And like Homer, if we really want to dive into the configuration here, there are some subtleties and nuance of each one of these applications that I'm kind of glossing over. But the important thing is that we're turning this pizza box into a basically ready-made backup appliance that also does document storage. Now I will say, Windows 10 by default backs up files every hour, which is ludicrous, and keeps them forever, which will chew up all your disk space. So you want to be sure to change those configuration options in the GUI to probably only keep like 3 months of backups, and maybe every hour is a little too frequent, maybe every few hours. And every time you make a change in your My Documents folder, it's going to replicate to the server. Now, if you're a crazy person and you save your files somewhere else other than Windows doesn't expect, this file history backup thing is basically garbage. That's just Windows for you, though. That has nothing to do with Supermicro or TrueNAS or whatever software you want to run on the server. Now, if you're into Windows Server, guess what? This hardware is fully qualified for Windows Server, so if you don't want to bother with any of this TrueNAS anything or Unraid or any other operating system, Windows Server 2019 on this hardware, yeah, totally going to work. Our configuration here is 6 cores and 16 gigabytes of memory. If you do go the Windows route, I'm going to recommend 32 or 64 gigabytes of memory, but the 6 cores for a basic file server that can also manage backups is plenty, because it's a relatively high clock speed for the 6 cores that you have. It would be nice if the built-in network was a little faster too, 1 gigabit ports. It's not really that fast in 2022, but you do have that PCIe expansion slot and you can add another network card. If you have some ideas for a project you'd like to see with this pizza box server, open source or otherwise, let me know, because as it stands, we've got Pi-hole, we've got Nextcloud. I can do the Steam Cache Docker setup on this. I can do a whole bunch of other different setups. We're basically running all that right now on this box, and it's completely fine. So what would you like to see? What would you like to see in terms of a setup? Be sure to check out that guide on the Level 1 forum. I'm Wendell, I'm signing out, and I'll see you there. Don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry. And then the fans ramp up. So I get some sound of that.